A small, not so small pirate show. While some brandish with a agreed smile the beautiful actions that are taken here and there around the world to signify the dominant system that it is heavily mistaken, others try to assume more courageously their detestation of the political and economic elites of the system through criticism and denunciations. The modernity of today further confirms a kind of well-thought which gives itself the attires of great spiritual consciousness. And perhapsBeing is that indeed that, a spiritual conscience so high that it can afford a very badly veiled contempt towards the way in which the elites direct the system, that is to say, the world. Also, this pirate program does not address to those who bring the defenders of the widow and the orphan to the clouds and who campaign with conviction for a green world, without plastic packaging and without fishnets. We know that if we gave the orders to these beautiful consciences that know what to do, they would direct the world in a very worse way than the current elites. What do we say in this little pirate show? When we leave the ease of external judgment, which necessarily condemns the words and acts of the political-economic elites, and when we put a foot in a more sober analysis of the situation, what do we see? The first thing we see is that the members of the politico-economic elites are not different from the members of the other elites. That is to say, that they are men. Please, human beings, allow us to use language conventions without involving gender problems. What is an elite? In an area, it is all men who best master the knowledge and skills attached to the field considered. Some are celebrities, others are not. In the field of politics, because of the clean nature of this field of activity, most members of the political elites are also some sort of celebrities. This is not necessarily the case in the business field. We say that the members of the elites, whatever they are mainly men. And this detail, which is not one, is ignored by all those who readily criticize political and economic elites. Why do we say that this detail is ignored? We say this in the sense that people do not draw all the useful consequences of this detail before training their judgments or to formulate their criticisms. For example, a man will always seek and first to guarantee his personal interests, and it is only when there has been a certain base in this area that he will have enough psychological energy available to take care of the interests of others. When it happens otherwise, it is a sign that the individual suffers necessarily of a psychological alteration, which predisposes it, for example, to sacrifice itself for others, because it will be conditioned in one way or another to believe that the great idea of others is more important than the fact of his own individuality. Gives all the discourses aimed at diabolizing the concept of ego directly or indirectly, which originally means the principle of an individual consciousness capable of distinguishing itself from its environment. The spectrum, nature, and the level of what the person defines himself as his personal interests do not constitute a fixed data. On the contrary, the parameters which determine personal interests are in direct relation with the capacities of the individual. A person normally constitutes no desire for something he recognizes as being out of reach of his abilities. No one today is frustrated because he has not been able to finish his individual spaceship in time to spend the holidaysChristmas orbit around the Earth. Nobody. Perhaps not Elon Musk. Who would have the means? By remaining in the question of personal interests, you must understand that having higher capacities in one field does not change the psychological economy of man. This only changes the size, so to speak, object that he is able to grasp and handle, and with which he is capable of developing real psychological relationships, and not only whimsical projections. For politicians, the idea of succeeding in his political career, or simply the idea of prospering financially through the activity of politics, participate in the same mechanisms as those who are at work, for example, in the physicist who wishes to win the admiration of his spares or ensure better financial comfort thanks to his popularization books. There is always this fundamental dimension in which the elite man always has a great love for the field in which he has developed a certain mastery or a certain expertise. Because the love of an area only really becomes great when the mind has succeeded in dominating the complex subtleties of the field considered. Otherwise, this love remains a simple emotional appetite. One of the immediate consequences of this fact is that for the politician, the most important thing is not the satisfaction of this or that part of the population. It is extraordinarily well placed to know that there is never any unity of interest within the population, but contradictory and divergent interests. What is most important to him is that he can succeed in his career. And his criteria for, once again, are not necessarily subject to the desires of this or that part of the population. For the thoughtless man, it seems obvious that there is a common good, a common interest, the evidence of things to do and things not to do, an absolute of good and an absolute of evil. This is why the thoughtless man is so quick to lay final judgments on politicians. All liars, all thieves, all irresponsible, all the same. And those who escape this peremptory judgment necessarily succumb to it if they have the opportunity to one day access power. For the politician, the notion of common good does not exist and cannot to exist. What exists are ideological choices, each trying to define what the most relevant meeting area should be between obviously divergent interests, sometimes even opposite. We will still lift only a consequence of the fact mentioned above, to know that the members of the political and economic elites are men. They are not gods. They are men, and if they are psychologically normally constituted, they look at other men in an intrinsically egalitarian conscience of otherness. Does that mean? This means, for example, that no member of the elite considers himself as the metapatriarch of a population if it is psychologically normally constituted, but essentially as a man taking care of tracing his way and living his life in middle of other men. One of the implications of this is that his love of others cannot claim an absolute posture, but meets the criteria of a completely relative dynamic. You yourself like people like in itself, and more those that are kind to you. You do not hesitate to feel anger against so-and-so, to feel disappointed with another, and to want to have nothing to do with a third. You have admiration for some and less admiration for others. Even when you are in universal love postures, the honesty of examining your emotions and your feelings shows that your love for others responds to a necessarily variable geometry, and this is normal. There are people for whom you will give everything, and people for whom you will not miss hard words. You believe you love everyone when reality is that your love is simply a relative, emotional, relational way, with variable geometry. And again, this is normal. What most people will live in terms of relationships that we will say individual. The members of the political and economic elites experience it on other scales. The feelings that you will have towards individuals, they will have them towards whole populations and whole peoples, because they can interact significantly with large human groups. Of course, as most people can do, they will also generalize and attribute to everything a group characteristics that may not be founded. But as they work at levels where we can really speak of real interactions between their own individuality and very identifiable human groups elsewhere, they have a psychological seizure of human groups, which is no less valid and less legitimate than the ability you have to imagine the personality of a particular individual, where one could expect from God that he has love universal for all humanity. The elite man works like his fellow men, he loves certain groups, and he likes fewer others. And just as you will have a lot of trouble loving someone who criticizes you and who judges you all the time, the elite man ends up feeling much less empathy towards social classes and types of populations, one of the favorite exercises of which is the verbal lynching of the elites. We are not here in a speech tending to exonerate the elites. We explain certain things, that's all. And yes, there is no reason why the elites are in universal love towards everyone. You yourself are a man, and you are not in such love. They are also men, neither better nor worse than you absolute, but simply much more gifted in the technicalities and complexities of an activity field.